千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for the sacred process in the Tao with one another. So now, without further ado, let's get right back to Tao Te Ching chapter 10. The name of this chapter is Mystic Virtue, 玄德. And as the title implies, it is all about the mystic virtue. And we talked about previously, mystic in this context points to the profound nature of the virtue. And we will talk about the details. Initially, we begin with the internal practices and external practices that lead up to mystic virtue. So let's go ahead and return to that. Our exploration of the chapter, section by section. In the previous sectional analysis, we divided up this chapter into 3 sections. Section 1 is about Tao cultivation that is internally directed. It's all about the state of your being. That is, can you be relaxed? Can you hold on to the Tao mentally and spiritually? This is what we covered last time. Section 2 is about Tao cultivation that is externally directed. It's all about how you deal with the outside world. This is what we will cover today. Section 3 is about the main topic, mystic virtue. It brings the internal and the external together to showcase the manifestation of the 玄德 concept. Now, as I mentioned, last time we covered section 1, so what I would like to do is a quick recap of that and then go right into section 2. Section 1 starts out with the concept of holding to your soul and embracing oneness. This is directly addressing the meditative part of one's internal practice. At the same time, it also applies to living one's life. This is because the overall concept of mystic virtue is patterned after the yin and yang symbol, where internal practice has elements of the external and vice versa. Therefore, the oneness you experience in a meditative state maps to the oneness in your everyday existence in terms of your adherence to the Tao. That is to say, can you keep yourself on the path of oneness in your daily actions, your thoughts, your words, without straying away from that path? So looking at this graphic, you see the dichotomy of what we're talking about now. To the left, embracing oneness as it applies to meditation. where when you go into the meditative state, there's going to be all kinds of thoughts swirling around in your mind that you will need to gather up and let them settle. In a similar way, as you go about your everyday business, infusing your cultivational practice in everything that you do, you're going to find yourself being distracted from every direction, people making demands on your time and attention, distractions, sometimes even temptations. So, all of which recall to mind the importance of sticking to the one, being true to the one, which again is the oneness within, that is, the deepest part of you that is connected to the oneness of the Tao. The deepest part, the truest part of you that is one with the one. So moving on. Then section 1 goes into the next most important concept, and that is the state of the infant. We talked about how this is mentioned multiple times in the Tao Te Ching due to its importance. Here you see the iterations. We've got chapter 20, 28, and 55 in addition to the current chapter, which is 10. So in the meditation context, this is all about relaxing. Can you relax thoroughly, completely, like an infant? And those who have practiced meditation, who have experience with a meditative state, will understand how important this is. In the other context, which is living life, relaxation maps to being soft like an infant. That is, approach life with the power of the soft, which the Tao Te Ching tells us overcomes the hard. So in both contexts, the soft represented by the infant has implications that are crucial in either case. Continuing with the recap, this is where we ended last time. The third point in that internal practice is about cleaning away or letting go of the worldly view. The worldly view is all about the material world in which you and I inhabit. This is about the mundane, everyday concerns. So we know that in order to enter a meditative state, you have to relax and let go. You cannot keep thinking about the mundane world and all the things you have to do. I think you know this will only make you tense up. This will make it impossible to go into meditation. And in the context other than meditation, the context about living life, this is all about elevating your thinking beyond the worldly or the mundane. This is because most people we come across, we can observe that they are mired in the material world. Their thoughts are mostly about material concerns. It's a narrow perspective where thoughts about spirituality usually fall by the wayside. They're cast aside because people are too busy worrying about the day-to-day. And some keep their thoughts compartmentalized. What I mean by that is during the week, Monday to Friday and Saturday, it's all about the secular world. On Sundays, it's about the church. It's about the sacred. The rest of the time, they may not think about it too much. They relegate it to Sundays. In the Tao, I want to point out it's different. What Tao sages consistently advocate is minding both the secular and the sacred at all times, 7 days a week. Because there doesn't need to be an artificial division between the two. So that's it for the recap of what we talked about last time, the previous discussion that began chapter 10. Now, let's go ahead and summarize section 1 before we go into section 2. So this is the slide for the summary. Let me point out that the first column you see on the left is going to be about the meditative state that we're going to fill in. Now, the meditative state has an effect on Tao cultivation, which in turn has an effect on life applications, living your life day to day. So the Chinese that you see there, those are the 3 main points of the inward directed practice. The first one there is in holding the soul and embracing oneness. Can one be steadfast without strain? Let's apply that to the meditative state. So the idea is that you must gather your scattered thoughts into the oneness of your mind. Focus on the center of your being and hold steady. So this makes it quite clear. Those that have practiced meditation recognize this right away. This is how we go into the meditative state. And the next one is also applicable to that. The next one says in the Chinese, in concentrating the energy and reaching relaxation, can one be like an infant? So applying that to meditation, it means direct your attention to the flow of energy within. Use breathing technique to attain a state of relaxed concentration. So this is also familiar to people who have done meditation. It's step 1 and step 2 we're talking about. Step 3 continues that trend. Step 3 in Chinese says in cleaning away the worldly view. Can one be without imperfections? Can you perfectly be without the worldly or the mundane or the materialistic views? So that again is exactly what you and I would do if we were to meditate. Let worldly concerns be washed away from your thoughts, leaving only the perfection of serenity. It is no accident that the 3 points map to Tao cultivation. This is basically pointing out that the spiritual side of you is inextricably linked to the mental side of you, or the spirit maps to the mind. And if you prefer, the soul directly connected to the mind or your thoughts. So for Tao cultivation, let's talk about the oneness. Embrace the oneness of the Tao as your guiding principle. Stay on the path and avoid straying into what may appear to be shortcuts. When we explore spirituality, there's all kinds of approaches, methods, paths. There are many paths out there. Some make lavish promises, like a shortcut to enlightenment. Lao Tzu specifically speaks against this, saying that they only appear to be shortcuts, they are actually illusory. There are no true shortcuts in life, but the Tao itself is a plain, broad, and straight avenue. It's easy to walk. So we want to be careful about that. Then, when it comes to the next one, being like an infant, that applies to Tao cultivation in a specific way. Direct your mental energy in cultivating the childlike state of softness and flexibility. Your mind becomes open, curious, and receptive. So it is very important to note, in this case, that the word we use is a childlike state of mind, before the mind has been tainted by all the materialistic concerns. Childlike as opposed to childish. Childish would have more of the connotation of tantrums or not understanding how things will work. Childlike is preserving that sense of openness, sense of wonder, like, wow, this is so cool. Life is so great. We used to feel that all the time, as a newborn. More and more, the world can wear away at those thoughts, making one more cynical. So the goal of Tao cultivation is to regain what's always been there, but that we have forgotten, the childlike state of mind. Then, on the third point, this is about the worldly views. When it's applied to cultivation, it's about worldly views and knowledge. Note the worldly views and knowledge that many adhere to transcend the way they think with the unconventional Tao. So even today, the Tao is still relatively unknown. It's the rare individual who has really delved into it to learn what's been discovered again and again through the centuries from ancient times until today. So this column, Tao cultivation, this is mostly still sticking with the internal mental landscape. This is how we think, how we change our thinking to be more aligned with the Tao. By changing that, by changing the way we think, we begin to have an effect on the outer world. That is, the real world where we interact with other human beings. Thus, I have an arrow down here from the inward to the outward. In the yin and yang symbol, this is the elements of the other, that within the half, within the complementary duality that is the internal, there is an element of the external. So that's what this is. So life application, let's talk about oneness. Hold on to your virtues without straying, even if this puts you at a disadvantage or under pressure to compromise your values. So this is the reason why I told the story about the rescuer last time. Because sometimes we get tested, and sometimes the test is not easy to pass. Then, what about the infant? How would that apply to life applications? It applies in one specific way, and that isn't to be baby-like. It is to manage your energy usage in daily living, approach personal interactions in a relaxed frame of mind without stress or contention. This is applying the relaxation that begins in the meditative state, applies to mental energy, and now applies to personal interactions. It is also about using the soft, the power of the soft. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Lastly, worldly views. There is no need to be bound by worldly views and knowledge. as people often are. Expand your perception to include multiple perspectives. So, to clarify, when I talk about multiple perspectives, I am specifically referring to how when people have sort of a single-minded, single-track focus on materialistic gains, that I would describe as a narrow perspective. When people forget or cast aside all about spiritual concerns or spiritual truths, the great truths that apply to life, then I would say they're losing out on a very valuable perspective. To incorporate that is the beginning of having the multiple perspectives, what the Tao sages talk about when they say you want to practice the secular and the sacred at the same time. That's two perspectives. And there's a whole bunch more in between. So let's move on. This is the summary that you see here for the first section. We are now ready to go into the second section. Line 7, it says, in loving the people and ruling the nation. First thing that we'll do is to break down the characters one by one. So first, we have the character for love, I. That is still commonly used today. Then we have the character for people, then govern, and then country. So if you string them all together, you get love people, govern country. So the meaning that it would suggest is correct. As you love the people and govern the country, this seems to be addressing the king or the emperor. Now, in reality, this line works on two levels. Indeed, it can be the advice for the king or emperor. It is all about ruling wisely. But at the same time, the other level that it works on is to the individual. Advice to the individual as the ruler of his or her own life. It's all about managing your relationships with other people and managing your work. So other people in this mapping will be other kingdoms with which you have diplomatic ties. When you wage war against another kingdom, that's when you have contention, you have disagreement, you have arguments with somebody else. And that somebody else is the kingdom you are at war with. Now, on the positive side, for us, this is all about relationships, tasks, and work. And as we all know, all of these together, it is no trivial task to manage your private kingdom, the private kingdom that is your life. And I can even just take one part of this. The last one there, the last word that you see in this line, work, that can be expanded. When you talk about work, it's planning for the future, prioritizing your tasks in the present, allocating your time wisely, making wise the best possible decisions, and so on. So there's complexity involved. No trivial task, as I said. Moving on to line 8. Line 8 says, can one be without manipulation? So as usual, as we did in the previous slide, we'll break down the 4 characters here. The 4 characters, the first one, the first character means can or able to. The second character means to not have or to be without. The third character usually means to do, to take action. Here, it's extended to mean to interfere with or to meddle with. The last character there is not a word, but a punctuation mark. It's a character that represents the question mark. So if you were to string them together, you get can without middle, question mark. So the meaning is, can you rule or manage your life without meddling with other people? Here, I want to give you a preview that this is all about focusing on yourself, minding what you do, not what other people do. That makes sense. But then another way that I can say the same thing is that when you focus on yourself, you are embracing the oneness of your being. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because we have just reviewed it and summarized it. It comes from the first section. So that is a correspondence we will be returning to. Now, let's talk about the king that rules without meddling in the people excessively. For the king, Lao Tzu recommends leadership without attachments. This is something that we can generalize to apply to a person in a position of power, and this can be at every level of society, including the family. Lao Tzu is recommending leadership in that role without attachments, interference, and manipulative schemes. So this is how we can map that to the individual level down from the king or the emperor. So basically, Lao Tzu is saying, number one, you want to take charge. You want to be firmly in charge of your life. Take responsibility. So to be the king, the queen, the ruler, the emperor, the empress, it isn't just having the power, it's also having responsibility. And Lao Tzu also says, when you interfering with other people tends to bring negative consequences. The more you meddle, and it doesn't matter how benevolent your intentions are, the more you will introduce unforeseen side effects. The more you make everything more complex than what they have to be. So these are words of pure wisdom from Lao Tzu. Then Lao Tzu goes into the third point in the external practice. Line 9 says, in the heavenly gates opening and closing. So again, we'll break it down into to analyze the four characters one by one. The first character is heaven or sky. One of the easier characters in Chinese. The second character, also easy, means door. Then we have the character for open and the character for close. So string these characters together, you get heaven, door, open, close. So the translation is, this is why the translation says, in the heavenly gates opening and closing. So you can see the translation actually maps to a verbatim transcription fairly closely. Now, when one thinks about the heavenly gates opening and closing, it can lead to a misinterpretation that this has something to do with weather. Like, for instance, the heavenly gates opening up to let the rain come through. Well, that's actually not the metaphor. This is not a reference to weather. It's not a reference to rain or snow. It's something else. The heavenly gate is an ancient metaphor for the mind. So no metaphor intended here about rain coming down. It's about the functioning of the mind. The opening of this gate refers to mental activity, thinking thoughts, coming up with ideas, considering an existing idea, etc. The closing of this gate refers to the mind being inactive. So for instance, when the mind is resting, when you let your mind drift, thinking about nothing in particular, or in the beginning of this chapter, when you go into a meditative state, that's the heavenly gate closing. So I hope that makes it clear. It's sort of talking about the mind like the functioning of the human heart, that it's pumping blood. The heavenly gates in reference to the mind is also depicting a cadence or rhythm in the thinking of thoughts. Line 10. Can one hold to the feminine principle? What does that mean? Well, the feminine principle is the yin side of the yin and yang duality. So the meaning is, can you use your mind with the yin principle as your basis? So it's a fair question to ask. Why yin principle as the basis? Why not yang? Or why not a balance of yin and yang? Well, the reason for that, Laozi is basically saying here that people tend to veer off too much to the yang side. People tend to rely on too much yang. As we all interact in the world, the sages have observed since ancient times, and it's true today as well, there's too much aggression and contention in the world. It's just like when you drive on the road nowadays, it's almost a guarantee you're going to come across people who are honking in anger to have other people move aside or to go faster, etc. There's a lot of yang energy that we encounter in the world. So the sages are basically saying we need more balance. And the way to balance too much yang is to base our thinking on the yin principle, to bring it back from too much aggression for a nicer balance. The important thing here is to note that Laozi and the Tao sages are really trying to get us to become more balanced rather than to be too much on the yin side. And they are suggesting this adjustment only because time and time again, they're noticing the entire world going off too much into the yang. You can also guess that this is exactly how Laozi would feel because he lived in the time of the warring states. Whenever we have warfare and chaos, there's always too much yang aggression, contention in the world. So it's important to note the balance. It doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean withdrawing or surrendering. What it does mean is about becoming more thoughtful, more deliberate, not rush into things. It is what we need the most in the world right now. It's about treating one another in that nurturing, compassionate, humane way. Having balance in that is going to promote overall well-being of all of us. It would also promote the growth of the soul, the development of the spirit. So let me talk a little bit more about the yin side of the yin and yang symbol and why it is important. And let me use examples about what we typically come across in life and how we can adjust to be more balanced for better results. In this table, which is what I call the power of the yin. I have 3 columns here. The life situation column is meant to be general categories serving as examples. The idea is that you will recognize one or more of these as something that you have recently gone through, are going through now, or will go through in the near future. So in that life situation, the common occurrence is what usually happens, especially among the people who don't really know the Tao. So they act in the same way that most other people would. And then there's the Tao approach, the rare approach of the Tao cultivator who will transcend the ordinary and create a better result. So let's look at a life situation. There's a disagreement, contention flares up. So let me ask everyone, can this happen? Yes, people fight sometimes. We know that, we see that. Now, the usual occurrence, the common occurrence that we observe from time to time is argument, shouting match, physical clash, like when a fight breaks out, violence. So this is what can happen. What we want to do as Tao cultivators, infusing more of the yin energy into the situation, is to dial down the rhetoric, let cooler heads prevail, which I understand is easier to talk about sometimes than to do. But in the Tao, the recognition always starts out that we realize when we are in the grips of intense emotions, none of us can think rationally. We are likely to say or do things we regret later on. And you probably know this from your own experience. And the other recognition is that when disagreements devolve into violence, people get hurt, things get damaged. Relationships can be broken, possibly beyond repair. Nobody really wants any of that. So the recognition of that can guide us to dial down the rhetoric, to let cooler heads prevail. The reminder for the contending parties that, hey, listen, we're in the grips of intense emotions right now. It's going to lead us down a road that we regret later on. Nobody wants that. That reminder can help you bring the temperature down. So here's another life situation, not contention, but a standoff. Neither side in the standoff is willing to back down. So there's no fight breaking out, thank goodness, but there's still a feeling of antagonistic contention, perhaps hostility. And usually what we have seen happens is that, well, everything grinds to a halt. Everybody is stuck. Neither side gets what it wants. No progress is being made. People get frustrated. It is also something we all witness from time to time. It can happen. People sometimes cannot agree. You have a deadlock. So the Tao approach, cooperation, compromise, mutual benefit, win-win. So compromise is based on mutual understanding, seeing things from the other perspective, that is, more than one perspective. The hard as opposed to the soft approach is to refuse that compromise and probably justifying the refusal as, well, I'm just showing my moral strength. I'm standing here, I'm standing tall with integrity, refusing to back down. The yin principle, the yin element calls for someone, possibly yourself, to be the peacemaker, to be the negotiator, to bring about the realization that working together can result in greater benefits from both sides, and then finding a way where it's not a zero-sum game, one side wins, the other side loses, but aligning interests. What they want is what you want, therefore bringing both sides to the same side, pointing out the synergism of teaming up. Like, rather than to be stuck here, we can team up and do something really great. Not easy to actually implement sometimes, but it all starts with a realization that it's possible. Another real-life situation that can occur, that happens all the time, is changes are common. Maybe common for the entire world, the country, the community, etc. Now, what happens usually when changes come? You know it, I know it, we've all seen it. People resist the changes. People insist on doing things the same way as before. People ask, why does it have to change? Why can't we just keep on doing what has worked for decades? Now, technology is a pretty common driving force in the change we're seeing in the world today. It is also something that many people fear because change represents the unknown. Change is outside of our comfort zone. In the Tao, we have recognitions about change. The Tao approach is to adapt, learn something new, and benefit from change because the recognition is that change is inevitable. It's a fact of life. It's gonna happen, whether you want it to or not. To be alive and to thrive is, in the Tao, to be flexible and adaptable in dealing with ever-changing conditions. And people who refuse to change can justify themselves. They may say, oh, I'm old-fashioned, or I'm traditional. When you talk about being old-fashioned and traditional, it's an appeal to nostalgia or the past that has been idealized. We human beings do this a lot. We think back to the past. We don't really want to forget the bad parts. So we remember just the good old days. The past gets idealized, then we want to hang on to it. People also say that they want to rely on the tried and true. They'll say the old ways are the best ways. So how can we use the soft approach to resolve a situation like that? Well, the Tao approach is to find common ground and seek the alignment of interests. I used to know a project manager who was adept at managing change. When he was in charge of a project to make changes, he invariably ran into resistance. And he would tell me about, for instance, an elderly employee complaining, hey, listen, I'm doing my job just fine. What do I need to learn something new? What do I need to learn new technology? And sometimes people would say things like, I am X number of years old, maybe 50, 60, whatever that number may be. I am fill in the blank years old. I'm like an old dog that can't new tricks, that cannot learn new tricks. That's pretty common. And then this might be an employee with a long tenure at the organization, might be someone who was well-liked, trusted, trustworthy, reliable. A good employee you wouldn't want to lose. It is to your benefit then to bring him over to your side so he or she would welcome change. So the project manager who was adept at doing this he said the key was to be clear and informative. People were much more likely to cooperate if they knew the reasons for the change. They needed to know the change wasn't just for the sake of change. It was something that the company needed. The company needed to transform itself to better adapt to changing market conditions in the world. And when the employee understood that and thinking about how they really kind of like this job, it gives them a level of compensation that lets them maintain their current lifestyle. There's a commute that they can accept. They don't want to lose the job either. Thus, desires and goals are becoming aligned. They want to keep the job. And in some cases, the project manager would get to know the elderly employee on a personal level and may say things like, well, you mentioned the other day that you wanted to learn more about this new technology so that you can have more in common with your grandchildren. You can spend time with them. You can use your mobile phone, your smartphone, to communicate with them. So let this be an opportunity for you to do that. Well, this is exactly what the elderly employee wanted. So again, you've got the alignment of interest. Then, let's talk about another situation. Merchants promoting products and pushing sales. So the usual hard sale is the high pressure sales tactics, very aggressive. And usually this involves things like, well, this is a time limited offer. There's time urgency. This price won't last. You must act quickly. And usually coupled with misleading statements, over-promising what the product can do, over-promising on features, glossing over shortcomings. And why do these things take place? Well, because they want to maximize the short-term profitability, want to meet the sales quota, a short-term gain due to short-term focus. This has very detrimental consequences down the road. So the yin approach, infusing more of the yin, means understanding customer needs, building long-term relationships, coming in not from the perspective of increasing sales quota, but from the perspective of providing a valuable service. I have seen it work many times. It's the best long-term strategy, whereas the hard sale is very short-sighted. Lastly, I want to generalize to say what happens when there's negative energy coming your way. What do I mean by negative energy? Well, it can be a personal attack. Personal attacks take so many different forms. It can be written, verbal, when someone is yelling at you, cussing you out, even physical. It can be a physical attack as well. What usually happens when this is occurring is that for most people, shields up, getting very defensive, or sometimes even deciding to attack first, be preemptive, launch that preemptive strike. The Tao approach, not quite the same. The Tao approach is to redirect and channel the incoming energy. Now, there are multiple techniques associated with this, and they are beyond the scope of our discussion today. But let me use one example. Suppose you are encountering a verbal attack on you that is very personal. It's an accusation. It's a condemnation. How would you redirect and channel that negative energy coming your way? One way to do it, one of the techniques, is simply by asking questions for clarification. Like, are you talking about this or that? Can you be a little more specific? I'd like to understand what you're saying. Just by asking simple questions, you begin the process of redirection of that negative energy. Now, if redirecting channel sound familiar, it could be because it is the focus on the physical side of the Tai Chi teachings. Tai Chi is all about circular movements, deflecting, redirecting, channeling energy. It is very effective for those who have mastered it. So what we're talking about here right now is really the Tai Chi of everyday living, and that's the Tao. Let's continue to line 11. Line 11 says, in understanding clearly all directions. And this starts out with two characters there that I would like to single out. 明白. So these two characters are common, easy characters, where the first character means clear, sometimes mistranslated as bright. Bright is actually a different character, 亮. This character here means clear. And then the second character there, 白, that's the color white. It just means plain. So the meaning of the two together is to understand. That is, to be able to see something clearly and plainly. This is a common expression that is used every day in modern Mandarin. And in this usage, it is specifically talking about understanding that is based on experience. That is to say, rather than just an intellectual understanding, understanding the concept, but not the actual occurrence. Continue on. I want to bring in the next two characters. You'll see the character there for 4. That's the next to last character in this line. And then the 4 reaches, meaning the 4 directions, which means all directions. So it's like when we talk about the 4 corners of the earth, we're actually saying everywhere on earth. So when you put the 4 characters all together in one line, it is saying understanding all directions because we often fail to become aware of everything around us. We see what's in front of us, but not what's behind. And a lot of times we're not even aware of what's happening to the left or to the right. So one example that is often dramatized, like in television shows and movies, is when you talk about someone and unaware that he's standing right behind you. So, for instance, at the office, somebody can be carrying on an extended rant about the boss to vent his frustration. And then he's looking at everybody, noticing everyone has a funny, strange expression, looking at him, looking behind him, and then the person who's complaining, he's like, the boss is right behind me, isn't he? He turns around and there's the boss standing right behind, having heard everything, all the complaints. So that's common, at least it's commonly depicted. And this is what Lao Tzu is talking about, that you must be aware, that you must have that situational awareness, you must be mindful. And the way it's usually talked about is that in the Tao, mindful awareness includes situational awareness. And that in turn is to know not just what's in front of you, but what's all around you. So now the question is, how can you and I become more aware. That'll take us into the next line, line 12. Can one be without intellectuality? So Lao Tzu says that because when we overthink a situation, we end up with tunnel vision. We're so intent upon it that one thing that we don't notice what's happening around it. And in modern times, there are many studies being done about the limited bandwidth or the limited attention span that human beings have. So all we can do is to pay attention to specific things at any one time. Selective attention. This is actually the basis for magic, stage magic. The skillful performer of stage magic is able to redirect attention to something while the real trick is being done, out of sight or not noticed. Therefore, Tao cultivators shift this mental balance from analysis mode to perception. Perception here means taking it all in. It means taking a mental step back to observe without attachments. When you get into the habit of doing this, you begin to see things that everybody else will miss. Everybody else will overlook what you notice. You will also go beyond what most people use, the intellectuality, for their narrow perception. It can disconnect us from reality. It is mostly emphasizing logic or comparisons of quantity, who's got more, who's got less. So these are not bad things, are not bad tools to use in your arsenal. It's just that when you rely only on them, you can jump to conclusions based on limited input. You can jump to conclusions or judgment, decisions based on only one source of information. So in this line that we're looking at, what Lao Tzu is advocating is that we take all directions into account. So it's just like when we talk about how no matter how you slice it, there are always two sides. Of course, when I talk about the two sides, we do want to be careful not to fall into false equivalence. You know, like saying, well, both sides lie, so they are the same. I don't trust either side of them. In reality, the two sides are rarely ever the same. There's always a difference in scale and magnitude, sometimes a huge difference. Like the difference of a white lie versus an outright falsehood. That said, what Lao Tzu advocates remains important. We do have to expand our perception to see all directions, which means to understand multiple perspectives. There is a story to illustrate this idea, and it comes from the life of Confucius. Let me share the story with everyone. The story is called Rush to Judgment. During the warring stage period, Confucius and his disciples went on the road to visit the various kings and warlords. What they were hoping to do was to influence these kings and warlords toward peace, because it was a time of widespread chaos. In their travels, sometimes they would encounter armies on the march, sometimes even ongoing battles, and therefore they would need to wait until it was safe to hit the road again. On one such occasion, Confucius and his students, they found themselves stuck in one place for 7 days. Their food quickly ran out. Everybody was hungry. What to do? Well, one of the disciples, Confucius' senior disciple, Yan Hui, he ventured out into a dangerous situation where fighting was still continuous. He managed to evade danger and bring back some rice. So he set up a large pot in their camp and he began cooking immediately. He knew how hungry everybody was. While the rice was being cooked, another disciple caught sight of Yan Hui eating some rice from the pot. So right away, he thought Yan Hui must be sneaking a bite due to hunger. This was actually a serious transgression because all the disciples follow Confucius in holding themselves to the highest standard of propriety and proper behavior. So the transgression was pretty serious, but this other disciple decided to not confront Yan Hui. Instead, he went to see Confucius to report this. So this disciple greeted Confucius and he asked, "Master, when honorable individuals experience poverty, can they let that poverty change their ethics?" Confucius was emphatic and he said, "No. If they let their ethics be changed by external factors, then how can they refer to themselves as honorable individuals?" Then the disciple said, "Well, what about Yan Hui? Does the principle apply to him?" And Confucius said, "Of course. The principle applies to everybody, no exception." So this was the confirmation the disciple wanted to hear. He proceeded to report on what he had seen to Confucius. Confucius said, "I have long trusted Yan Hui's integrity. I do hear what you're saying, but I cannot suspect him solely on that basis. Perhaps, maybe, there is some reason behind it all. Say no more. I shall ask him myself." So Confucius summoned Yan Hui and said to him, "Yan Hui, I had a dream of my ancestors. I think they may have come to protect us in our time of need. So when you are done with the cooking of the rice, please perform an offering ritual with the rice before we eat it." So this request made Yan Hui look a bit worried. He replied, "Master, we cannot use that rice for the ritual. While cooking, I saw a bit of ash fall into the rice. I scooped up the ash and the rice it touched, intending to discard it. Then it occurred to me this would actually be a waste of edible food, so I ate it. Since I did consume a bit of the rice, it would be disrespectful for us to offer it in a ritual." "You are right," Confucius agreed. "If I were in your position, I would have eaten the tainted rice as well." So upon this, Yan Hui went back to the kitchen to finish cooking. Confucius turned to the other disciples present, and he said to them, "As you can see, the trust I have for Yan Hui is not something that had to wait until today to be proven." The end. So let me tie this story together with the message from Lao Tzu. Here's the Tao. The initial accusation from the disciple against Yan Hui represents one perspective, one direction out of four. And Confucius knew this was insufficient for clarity on the truth. Notice that Confucius did not react with shock, anger, or outrage upon hearing this transgression. It was perfectly plausible that Yan Hui had actually done that, sneaked in a bite, because they were all starving at the time. But Confucius did not jump to that conclusion because he knew things might not be what they seemed. So he waited until he had more information or more directions that he could see or more perspectives that he could incorporate. Now, you and I, we have all seen people who make decisions without this wisdom. Perhaps back in a time when you were falsely accused of something, you didn't get a chance to explain anything. You were just automatically assumed to be guilty. Or perhaps this happened to someone else. We've all seen this particular scenario. And in everyday life, we can also witness such a scenario. For instance, a customer may complain to the manager about an employee at an establishment, maybe a cafe, maybe a store. Upon hearing the complaint, the manager sides with the customer right away to reprimand the employee, overlooking the possibility that the customer may be making a completely unreasonable demand. In a case like that, the saying that the customer is always right may not apply. So this highlights the importance of sampling multiple perspectives. In the Tao, it is expressed as understand clearly all directions. All directions is more than one perspective. Reason why it's important is because different perspectives, different angles will allow you to look beyond the surface level. Use the example of a movie set to see what Lao Tzu and Confucius were getting at. The movie sets look great from one angle, the angle where the camera is positioned. It has to look good for that, and then the actors in front of the background can perform. But if you walk around the movie set, it doesn't take long for you to get a different angle where you can see the flimsy facade being propped up. A different angle allows you to look beyond the surface appearance, to see the true reality, and be able to see for yourself that the set is without substance, only appearance. So this applies to everything, even sources of information like the news. And this is where I talk about applying this to our lives. We want to refrain from immediately jumping to conclusions, no matter what it is. Today, falsehoods can be repeated and amplified by the power of the internet to mislead people, including ourselves. It's a real problem, and it doesn't seem like there's a solution in sight. And even when we're not talking about sources of news, the internet, sources of information, it could just be everyday conversations going on. We still want to guard against rumors and gossips and hearsay. We hear all kinds of stuff every day. Now, the problem with rumors, gossip, and hearsay is that from observation, we know they tend to be unhelpful. There is simply too much speculation, innuendo, and exaggeration in what people pass around. When you take a step back and observe with detachment, you know this is the case. And lastly, keep in mind that emotions can cloud one's judgment. So there are quite a few who are adept at using emotions to manipulate you. And the easiest example that comes to mind is outrage. When a news outlet figures out a way to get people mad about something, even a problem that's been distorted out of proportion, it's a way to keep ratings up. So we don't want to fall into that particular illusion. And we have to go back to what Lao Tzu says. In understanding clearly all directions, can one be without intellectuality? Can we go beyond logic to arrive at wisdom, to know truth separated from falsehoods? So the story, Rush to Judgment, comes from the Tao of Wisdom. You'll find that in greater detail, more discussions about Confucius' actions in that book. If you haven't seen it yet, I would like to recommend it to you. Now, moving from this, I want to also spend a moment specifically to talk about the Tao in the modern world. This is where we want to touch on the positive side of using the Tao. In the previous slide, we talked about what to be careful, how to exercise caution against misinformation that gets spread around. Now, on the positive side, we can also talk about how we can utilize, how human beings have utilized multiple perspectives to great benefits. Example, medical science and healthcare. For diagnosis, doctors consider multiple factors, not just the physical symptoms, but also lifestyle factors. So they will ask, do you smoke? Do you drink? What kind of stress are you under? So these form more than one perspective, a better chance to get at the underlying cause of the illness. From the patient's perspective, there are serious issues where the patient is advised to see more than one doctor for a second opinion and even a third opinion. Again, the patient benefits from multiple perspectives. So another category is education, and this is on the teaching and the learning side. Just like the medical science part, it's on the doctor and the patient sides. So nowadays, educators know that when they are able to incorporate diverse viewpoints, they can enhance the teaching material, they can clarify understanding, they can get at more of the historical truth by having diverse viewpoints. On the student side, multiple perspectives also come in handy because everybody learns differently. Some of us are visual learners. We need to see it in some kind of chart for better comprehension. Some rely much more on the auditory. They need to hear it in order to comprehend it. Some are kinesthetic. They need to feel it. So the different styles of learning are suited for different individuals. So the same curriculum can be delivered in different ways to appeal to the different modalities. Again, multiple perspectives. And what about the products that we use every day? Well, when the products are being designed, they benefit from multiple perspectives. Engineers will focus on functionalities, what the product can do. Designers, not so much on functionalities, but aesthetics and user experience, the look and feel. You can have the greatest functionalities, but if you are lacking in design, you end up with a product that nobody likes, even though the product itself may be quite capable. Then there's also the marketing people who focus on popular trends, consumer demographics. That is, what do people want? So in general, when we have multiple perspectives, we can identify blind spots because we all have our own biases and we all have our strengths, areas of expertise. When we work together, we uncover areas of problems that we miss because of the blind spots, and we contribute strengths, expertise to the solution. And we can also be more creative when people with different backgrounds come together. What happens always is the sparking of new ideas, new approaches, creative solutions. And finally, when you have just a single perspective in solving a problem, you may only be addressing part of the problem. By bringing in multiple perspectives, you can create something that's much more comprehensive, much more well-rounded, and overall very effective. So moving on, we're now able to summarize the outward directed practices, the three areas, and also talk about how they map back to the internal. So the number one, and you see this in the Chinese to the left-hand side, it basically says, in loving the people and ruling the nation, can one be without manipulation? And below that, in the heavenly gates opening and closing, can one hold to the feminine principle? And lastly, in understanding clearly all directions, can one be without intellectuality? What we have just covered. So starting from the top, life application. This appears to be advice for the king, but if we apply it to your life and mine, basically as you tend to your relationships and tasks, you want to focus on yourself and refrain from excessive meddling in other people's business. And then for the gate opening and closing, as you deal with everyday events, consider them in your mind, incorporate the yin principle to balance the yang in your thinking. And then for the four directions, we want to seek understanding from every angle of an issue, because multiple perspectives tend to bring out the truth. So this is what happens when we use the Tao to deal with the external world. Just like the yin and yang symbol, this external interaction can affect the internal state of Tao cultivation. Therefore, I have an arrow here from outward back to inward in the Tao cultivation. So the first one about the focus and embrace oneness in your being. Sustained effort on this path is the key to your mastery of the Tao. And then below that, the thinking, the yin principle. The yin or female principle maps directly to the softness symbolized by the infant, crucial not only for the mind, but also the spirit. By now you can see the first one maps to oneness, the second one maps to the infant. And then lastly, clarity on life situations shed light on distractions and misleading appearance, thereby washing away the worldly view. So, multiple perspectives mapping to worldly view. And the correspondence, easy to see, is that the first one maps to in holding the soul and embracing oneness, can one be steadfast without strain? And the second one, also easy to see, in concentrating the energy and reaching relaxation, can one be like an infant? And lastly, in cleaning away the worldly view, can one be without imperfections? Now you see the second part, outward directed practice, and you are able to connect them directly to the 3 points of the first part, section 1. We are now reaching the top of the hour, so it is time to jump to the summary for today. Last time, we talked about the internal, inwardly directed practice, which is about holding the soul, embracing oneness, concentrating your energy to relax, cleansing the worldly view, and those map to exactly what we have today in the external practice. The next set of summaries will be for next time because they speak directly to mystic virtue. In the third part of our talk on this chapter, we're going to talk about the mystic virtue extensively. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.